What if the best way to live a good life is to just ignore the world's biggest problems? It's a wild thought, right? But that's the shocking conclusion of one of the most famous satires ever written, Voltaire's Candide. So let's break down this brutal, hilarious attack on blind optimism and see what its surprisingly modern message really means for us.
Okay, to really get Candide, you have to picture the world it was born into. We're talking the 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment. It was an era just buzzing with this idea of reason, a solid belief in unstoppable human progress and this overwhelming feeling of optimism. The vibe was, humanity's got this and things are only getting better.
Now, at the very heart of all that optimism was this one very specific philosophical idea. It wasn't just, having a cheerful outlook. It was a serious argument that our world, with all its obvious, painful flaws, was literally the best one that God could have possibly created. And it's this single idea that Voltaire is about to just tear to shreds.
And listen, this wasn't some fringe belief. You had major thinkers, big names like the philosopher Gottfried Leibniz and the poet Alexander Pope pushing this idea hard. Their logic was pretty straightforward. God is perfect, right? So the world he created must also be the most perfect version possible. Any of the awful stuff we see, war, earthquakes, disease, that's just what they called partial evil. It's a necessary little piece of a grand divine puzzle that our tiny human brains just can't comprehend. It's basically a fancy way of saying, don't worry about it.
Yeah, Voltaire was not buying it. Not for a second. He was an empiricist, which means he trusted the evidence of his senses, what he could actually see and touch and hear. And the world he saw was overflowing with suffering that couldn't just be explained away by some abstract theory. To him, this whole philosophy was just a dangerous excuse to ignore reality.
And this chart right here, this is the core conflict of the entire story. On one side, you've got Pangloss, who's Candide's tutor. He's all about abstract theory, this idea that everything has a perfect cause and reason. And on the other side, you've got Voltaire's worldview, which is all about the hard, concrete evidence of reality. It says, look at all this suffering. It needs to be justified, not just explained away.
So instead of writing some dense, boring, philosophical essay that only a handful of academics would ever read, Voltaire picked up a much sharper weapon, satire. He wrote Candide to make this philosophy of optimism look completely ridiculous, making his point in a way that was funny, memorable, and absolutely devastating.
The story follows this young, incredibly naive guy named Candide. He gets kicked out of his cushy home in a castle and is forced to wander the world. But here's the thing. This is not an adventure story. It's a journey, for sure, but it's more like a systematic, brutal collection of all the evidence against the idea that this is the best of all possible worlds.
And this is the one question that just haunts Candide at every single turn. He really wants to believe his teacher Pangloss, but the relentless, horrific suffering he sees everywhere he goes makes that optimistic mantra sound more and more absurd.
And Voltaire pulls no punches. He just bombards Candide with every kind of evil you can imagine. You've got natural evil, disasters that aren't anyone's fault, like the very real, very catastrophic 1755 Lisbon earthquake that killed tens of thousands. And then there's moral evil, all the horrible things humans do to each other, like war, slavery, and religious persecution. For Voltaire, the evidence was just overwhelming.
But what's so powerful here is who Voltaire gets to present this evidence. He gives a voice to the victims themselves. In a pretty radical move for the time, female characters like Cunegund and the old woman get to tell their own horrifying stories of abuse and suffering. Their personal, emotional testimonies are a direct gut punch to Pangloss's detached ivory tower philosophizing.
But maybe the most powerful testimony comes from a slave in Suriname who's been horribly mutilated. After he explains that his hand and leg were cut off for trivial reasons, he says this: "For Candide, this isn't a theory anymore. This is a brutal, undeniable fact of suffering that no philosophy can possibly explain away. It's a real turning point."
So after witnessing all this horror, Candide is desperate. He starts searching for a place, any place, that might finally prove his teacher was right all along. He's looking for a utopia, a perfect world where optimism actually makes sense.
And the wild thing is, he finds it. He literally stumbles upon El Dorado, this mythical, perfect city. There's no greed, no courts, no prisons, and gold and jewels are so common, they're just like pebbles on the street. It is, by every measure, a perfect society. Which leads to this massive question. Candide finally found it.
the best of all possible worlds, the living proof of utopia. So why on earth would he and his servant choose to leave?
Because the problem wasn't with El Dorado. The problem was with them. They were so conditioned by the greed and ambition of the outside world that they couldn't handle living in a place where wealth meant nothing. So they packed up as much gold as they could carry and went right back to the corrupt world they came from. It's Voltaire's way of saying, even if a perfect society exists, we carry the poison of our own corruption inside us.
So finally, completely defeated and disillusioned, Candide and his friends settled down on a small farm in Turkey. And it's here, after all the chaos, all the travel, all the philosophical debates, that they finally figure out an answer.
And this final lesson comes in 2 quick encounters. First, they bother a wise man, a dervish, with their big philosophical questions about evil. And he literally just slams the door in their faces. It's a blunt rejection of useless talk. Then they meet a simple farmer who is perfectly happy because he ignores the news from the capital and just focuses on working his land. And that's when it clicks. The answer isn't a better theory, it's practical, useful work.
And all of this leads to the book's iconic final line: we must cultivate our garden. Now, this is more than just about planting vegetables, obviously. It's a powerful metaphor. It's about rejecting these huge, unsolvable global questions, and instead focusing your energy on your own small, manageable corner of the world, your work, your family, your community, and making that better.
And that leaves us with a really provocative question, especially for us today. In an age where we're just bombarded with overwhelming global issues 24/7, is Voltaire right? Is the smartest, wisest thing we can do to just turn away from all that noise and focus on cultivating our own garden? Or is that just a convenient excuse to look away? It's something to think about.